Welcome to the Rotary Club of Jonesboro, 5-time reigning Club of the Year. I'd like to introduce the program. It's my pleasure to introduce Megan Brown, our speaker. Megan is a Jonesboro native who graduated from Arkansas State and is a licensed social worker. In 2009, while living in Nashville, she learned about human trafficking and then began working for Free for Life International and interned with End Slavery Tennessee. She returned to Jonesboro in 2011 and served as the NEA area representative for Partners Against Trafficking Humans until 2015. Megan is a frequent speaker on human trafficking awareness and prevention to churches, schools, civic, and other nonprofit groups in Northeast Arkansas. Megan continues to work with law enforcement, social service providers, and other nonprofits to develop a strategic response to the human trafficking occurring in Northeast Arkansas. Megan's dream is to one day provide a safe house for survivors of human trafficking. Megan is married to Rollo Brown, and they have 3 children, Jude, Ruby Ray, and Raleigh May. I apologize. Please welcome Megan.
Well, good afternoon. Thank y'all so much for having me. I'm not sure if you're aware, but January is actually Human Trafficking Awareness Month. So y'all invited me during the perfect month to educate y'all about human trafficking. Our mission at Hope Found is to end human trafficking by creating awareness, educating the communities, and coordinating services for victims and survivors. Our vision is for Christ to set people free from all forms of exploitation and for Christ to set free people's addiction to the commercial sex industry. Okay, so I want you to imagine if you had a child or maybe a grandchild who started dating someone who they thought they could trust, only to learn after a few months that boyfriend or girlfriend wanted to sell them for sex. Or how would you feel if your child or your grandchild was told by a CEO of a modeling company that they could be their next top model, only to find out that they were tricked into providing nude photos so their boss could sell them? Or imagine what it would feel like to grow up in a home with a parent addicted to drugs. And when they needed a fix, they would sell you for sex in exchange for drugs or in exchange for money for drugs. Unfortunately, these situations are the realities of some of the clients that we serve, and they are the lived experiences of survivors of human trafficking and exploitation. So today we're going to talk about what is human trafficking. You'll be able to identify the different types of human trafficking occur, recognize the signs of human trafficking, as well as understanding your role in responding to trafficking. So tell me, what comes to mind when you hear the words human trafficking? I didn't hear that, I'm sorry. Okay, so you think, so people coming across the border from Mexico, okay. Anything else that comes to mind? Something you've seen in the movies or TV? Okay. Right. Yeah, you see that a lot on TV. Okay. Anything else? Right. Absolutely. You'll be really shocked to learn the realities of trafficking and what it really looks like. Okay. So human trafficking is a form of modern day slavery where a person profits from the exploitation of another person. Now, the definition follows what we call the AMP model, the action, means, and purpose. So there has to be an action such as recruiting, obtaining, soliciting, or advertising another person through the means of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of exploiting that person for labor, which is what labor trafficking is, or for commercial sex acts, which is where we see sex trafficking. Now, according to the law, the victims of human trafficking can be divided into 3 populations. First, you have adults who are over the age of 18 who have been persuaded or coerced into providing commercial sex acts by a trafficker using that force, fraud, or coercion. And I'll kind of break that down here in a bit. Then you also have children who are under the age of 18 who have been persuaded or forced or coerced into providing commercial sex acts by a trafficker. Now, the difference between the two is the force, fraud, and coercion component. For it to be an adult victim, that force, fraud, and coercion have to be proven. For it to be a child, it does not have to be proven. That's because a child is not able to, or at the legal age to consent to commercial sex acts. Any child that is providing commercial sex acts is easily being controlled or manipulated by somebody. A child doesn't wake up one day and think, yeah, I want to be a child prostitute or I want to be a stripper. They've either been groomed or manipulated into thinking that lifestyle is going to bring some kind of satisfaction or fame or money. And I would even go as far as to say that they've been groomed or manipulated and influenced by our media, by movies and TV shows and music that glamorize prostitution or that glamorize stripping and pornography. And then when it comes to labor trafficking, let me back up. Sorry. Okay. So commercial sex acts, that means that something of value is being exchanged for that sex act. So it's not just money, but it could also be drugs. It could be food, clothing, or shelter. And commercial sex acts come in the form of prostitution. It's also pornography, and it's also any type of sexual performance like you see at strip clubs. And then when it comes to labor trafficking, that's children or adults that have been persuaded or coerced to perform work or labor through force, fraud, or coercion. So those three elements do have to be proven for it to be a victim of labor trafficking. So what is force, fraud, or coercion? So let's play true or false. Tell me, true or false, most victims are kidnapped and held captive. Okay, good job, false. So one of the most common misconceptions that you'll see, I would say due to the media's influence, Hollywood's version of human trafficking, is that it often involves kidnapping somebody or physically forcing somebody into that situation. People are looking for that person that is locked up or chained up somewhere. They're looking for that person in the back of a semi-truck or that windowless white van that we were all warned about, growing up. But actually, there are circumstances in which traffickers may physically hold a person captive, but it's more common for traffickers to use psychological means in order to recruit and control their victim. So they may date them, get to know them through dating them, and enter into a romantic relationship. They'll groom them and recruit them and lure them through these force, fraud, and coercion in order to maintain control over them and trick them into a trafficking situation. Now, of course, you always want to be mindful of kidnapping, but it's so important to recognize that that's not only how it happens. If we tend to focus on looking for that perfect victim that's chained up somewhere or held captive, then you're going to miss the victims that you see in plain sight. You may have a child that goes to school with a victim of trafficking. You may see a victim of trafficking at a grocery store. So they're not always chained up somewhere. You'll see them in plain sight. So what force means is that once a trafficker has control over their victim, they've lured them into a trafficking situation, things will eventually become violent. They may abuse them, they may rape them, they may deprive them of food or sleep in order to maintain that control over them. They also may get them addicted to drugs. So this makes it really hard for a victim to leave that lifestyle for fear of, being physically harmed or also the drug addiction component that can also keep them in compliance. Then we have fraud. Fraud, I believe, is the number one way that traffickers recruit victims into trafficking, because fraud is false promises. So it's luring a victim with the promise of a good job, a better life, a better home environment. They promise that they'll make them a model. They'll promise that they'll make them famous on social media. And they may promise them some kind of romantic relationship. And basically, the trafficker wants to sell a dream to the victim. So whatever is missing in that whatever's missing in that victim's life, maybe it's love, attention, affection. Maybe it's a home. Maybe they're homeless. Maybe it's money. Whatever that victim is lacking, that trafficker is going to try to fill that. And all they rely on is that victim's boundaries to expand and their trust to increase. A lot of these false promises happen through communication online, as you can imagine, through the internet, on dating apps, even through video games and the common social media apps that our kids are on. It can also happen, though, at the mall or at the movies. You got to remember, these traffickers are predators. So wherever their prey is, wherever their targeted prey is, that's where these traffickers are going to be at. Also, we see fraud happening in the form of fake job ads posted online or posted around town on flyers. I tend to warn people that, if you see a job ad that's just a vague description of the job and it's a really high amount of pay and it's, call this number, that's a red flag. If it seems too good to be true, more than likely it is. I know that when COVID came on the scene and kind of shut down the world, I started seeing these signs pop up at intersections around town that said, like, make 10 grand working from your home, call this number. Well, I would assume for people like us, we would know that, hey, that seems like a scam is probably what we would think. Nobody's going to make 10 grand just working from home. But somebody that's in a state of desperation, that parent that maybe just lost their job due to COVID, they need a job real quick. And so people that are in states of desperation are more likely going to accept a risky job offer that could turn into a trafficking situation or that could turn into a scam. And nobody wants to be, a part of those. And then we have coercion. Coercion is blackmail. That's threats against the victim. It's threats against the victim's loved ones. It's telling them that, if you don't do what I tell you to do, then I'm going to do the same thing to your 5-year-old sister. Or if it's somebody that's here illegally, it's saying, if you don't work here and you don't do this job, I'm going to call ICE and get you deported. So this is another reason why victims why traffickers have such control over their victims. That's why they fear to leave. That's a very common question. It's like, well, why don't they leave? If they're able to go as they please, go to the grocery store, or they're out and about going to school every day, why don't they say something? Well, it's that coercion component. They're scared for their life, and they're fearful that this is going to happen to somebody else I love if I don't listen to my trafficker. Okay, so who are these victims that we're talking about? Majority of the victims are anywhere between 12 years old and 24 years old. Of course, we've seen younger and we've even seen older than that. Majority of the victims are female, but there has been an increase in the male victims of trafficking. Okay, now answer this true or false question. Traffickers target victims they know. True or false? Good, it's true. I would also say due to social media's influence and Hollywood's influence, many people think that traffickers are just randomly targeting people at Target or Walmart. Many people think that these traffickers are putting zip ties on your car, or they're writing letters and numbers on the back of your car to target you. And I bring up these examples because these are legit examples that I've seen through social media happening even in Jonesboro and all across the country. But the truth is that's not how traffickers work. Because remember, I mentioned that they want to lure you in through grooming you and getting to know you and maybe even dating you. They're not trying to target somebody with zip ties or try to target somebody at Walmart. Many survivors, majority of the survivors, have been trafficked by romantic partners, including their spouses, and family members, including their parents. Familial trafficking. We see a lot of that, in our area. That's when a parent is selling their kid for drug money or for money for rent. But the common thread, the thing to remember is that traffickers prey on the vulnerable. So they look for people with noticeable vulnerabilities. So of course, that covers our children. All our children are vulnerable. But there's also some other vulnerabilities that can make a child or even an adult more susceptible to human trafficking. And that is if they are homeless or maybe they run away a lot. Anytime there's a housing insecurity that puts people in desperate situations, they may accept help from somebody that, may be taking advantage from them, maybe taking advantage of them. Children with limited supervision in the home. Children who live in a home where there's a parent that doesn't really pay a lot of attention to who they're talking to online or maybe who they're hanging out with, they are extremely at risk of a trafficker or online predator gaining access to them. Children in foster care. 60% of victims of child sex trafficking have histories in the foster care system. That is because a child that's in the foster care system is very vulnerable. They've just been uprooted out of their home. They lost contact with their parents. And all they have to have is some trafficker out there making promises that, hey, I can be your family and I can take care of you. Youth who identify as LGBTQ+ are also very vulnerable to the tricks and lures of a trafficker. And that's because traffickers like to prey on the feelings of rejection and alienation that are often experienced by LGBTQ+ youths. Those that are just longing for love and attention. You know, there's many survivors that we have served that thought they were entering into a mutual, respectful dating relationship, only to find out after a certain amount of months that, now they wanted them to prostitute themselves. So those that are looking for that love and attention are very vulnerable to trafficking. Homes with drug and alcohol abuse. For a child that's living in a home with alcoholic parents, they can easily be lured away by a trafficker promising them a better home environment. That trafficker will say something like, hey, your parents are, wasted tonight. You can come crash on my couch. I'll take care of you. You can live here. And so they can easily be lured away from their home environment. Some other characteristics that traffickers prey on, the need for money to provide for their family. They need a job. That's a very important vulnerability that can make them more at risk to the tricks and lures of a trafficker. Somebody just wanting a better life for them or better opportunities. And somebody with low self-esteem or self-worth is another vulnerability. Let's talk about labor trafficking real quick. So some of the industries that you'll see labor trafficking here in Arkansas are the farming and agriculture industry. You'll see it in the nail salons as well as our restaurants. I don't know if y'all remember in 2018, the owner of the Corinne restaurant on Caraway Road was arrested for human trafficking and rape. So it happens there as well. Now, some red flags to consider when it comes to labor trafficking victims. Usually they're unfamiliar with the area they live in because they don't have a lot of freedom to come and go as they please. They're working excessive long hours and they're paid very little for their work. Many victims of labor trafficking feel pressure by their employer to stay in their job, and many times they owe money to their employer. Their employer is holding a debt over their head. And honestly, they're never going to be able to pay that debt off. So they're constantly in that servitude to them. They don't have any control over their legal documents. Sometimes even the victims live at their place of employment, and the living and working conditions are poor. Many times labor trafficking victims will be monitored by somebody. Somebody's constantly watching, what they're doing. And of course, their boss is threatening them with deportation, or there's physical injuries. You can tell that they're anxious or fearful. Some sex trafficking red flags. Now, when it comes to sex trafficking, traffickers like to recruit typically from the internet so they can easily wear a disguise. So it's very important that if you have kids or that you have grandkids, that you absolutely monitor their online activity, whether it's through a phone or through video games. Leaving a device unmonitored for your kid to play on, you might as well be leaving the door wide open for somebody to come in and rob you. Traffickers will sometimes even take their most loyal victim and use them to recruit more victims. We see that happening in the schools. The trafficker will take, like I said, their most loyal girl, and they'll encourage her and tell her, hey, you need to go recruit more girls or more young boys for our family. And so we see that happening through peer recruitment in the schools. Other places we see sex trafficking taking place are at hotels, massage businesses, your everyday neighborhood, like I mentioned, familial trafficking, truck stops, and online on escort sites. Now, some red flags to pay attention to: that lack of control component. Does that person have control over maybe their money, what they do, where they go? Does that person, is somebody always speaking up for that person? Does that person even have a voice? Are they fearful when they're around, their trafficker who's their boyfriend? If there's a change in their behavior, a change in their appearance, school attendance, friends, interests, anytime there's like a 180, done in a child's life, that should encourage us to lean in and figure out, okay, what's going on in their life that's caused them such a change in their behavior, their mental health. Even their appearance could change. Maybe they're dressing a little more provocatively. If you work with homeless people, if you see a homeless person, especially a homeless kid, all of a sudden come into the homeless shelter and they have all these nice clothes and they have a new phone and these nice luxury items, but there's no explainable income, that's a red flag, especially if they talk about this friend of theirs or this boyfriend or girlfriend that's buying them these things. Of course, truancy and runaway attempts is a very common red flag that we see with kids. multiple visitors in and out of a home. So, I mentioned there's familial trafficking in just your everyday neighborhoods. And it's not just these low income rundown neighborhoods. I mean, it's happening in middle class and upper class families in neighborhoods as well. But if there's somebody constantly going in and out of a home, there's kids there, a lot of foot traffic. It could mean drug trafficking, but it also could mean sex trafficking. And so it should definitely be reported. Tattoos and branding. Traffickers often tattoo or brand their victims as a sign of ownership. They view them as property, so they'll do that. Of course, any type of sexually provocative images that are on the phone or social media accounts, and unexplained injuries are some red flags. Okay, so how do we fight human trafficking? So Hope Found fights human trafficking through prevention and restoration. So on the prevention side, we offer human trafficking education to the public. We've trained multiple law enforcement officers, medical professionals, and social service providers. And we also go into schools, into churches, into youth groups, and also teach our youth how to protect themselves from trafficking. On the restoration side of things, we offer a survivor-centered approach to meeting the many needs of our survivors, whether that be immediate needs such as they need, a safe place to stay, they need food or clothing. We're able to arrange that and get that for them. Or for long-term needs, if they need they need help getting stable housing or stable employment, they need to get a mental health therapist. We're also able to collaborate with local professionals just to wrap around them, show them some love, and make sure that we can get them on the right path to their healing and restoration. Our impact report. So in 2021, we served 32 individuals that were affected by human trafficking, providing a variety of services, from helping them find apartments to helping them find jobs, helping them get started on their GED, helping them get connected to a mental health therapist so they can start counseling. Just a variety of services. We've did 56 presentations, reaching over 1,100 people, which I'm pretty proud of considering how COVID's happened. Okay, so what is your role in fighting human trafficking? So everybody has a role in fighting human trafficking. And so one of my first things I would encourage you to do is to pray. If you're a follower of Christ like myself, please pray for us. We definitely need prayer as we continue to shed light on such a dark issue. But also I would even take it further, pray for the people that we serve, pray for the traffickers and the buyers, because those are the people that fuel the sex trafficking industry. And if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't even have sex trafficking. So pray that they'll have a change of heart. I encourage you to give. Majority of our funding comes from donors and our fundraisers right now. We need monthly Hands of Hope donors who commit to giving $25 a month to the sustainability of our program. If you like to shop on Amazon, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but Amazon has a charity option where you can select any nonprofit of your choice, and it's like 0.03% of your purchase will go back to that nonprofit that you choose. So that's pretty cool. Volunteer. We always are looking for volunteers to help out at events or fundraisers. And sometimes we look for volunteers to help out in the office. And then the last one, which I know as you're a part of Rotary, y'all already serve your community. So I appreciate what all y'all do for the community. But the biggest thing is, you can invest in your community. And that means you don't just have to be a volunteer with a human trafficking organization to make a difference, because fighting human trafficking means that helping those who are most vulnerable in your community, helping them find their self-worth and helping them find their value or find resources and opportunities. And sometimes even teaching them how to protect themselves from the tricks and lures of traffickers. And so this looks many ways. It could be becoming a CASA volunteer. It could be becoming a foster parent, being a mentor to a child, being their tutor, helping a family in your neighborhood, a single parent, find, stable housing and stable employment, helping out a local homeless shelter, or even volunteering at a local food bank. Being involved in serving in your community in those many ways help to eliminate those vulnerabilities that the traffickers are preying on. So together, we can create strong and healthy communities. So I appreciate y'all for taking the time out to listen to me today. This is my contact information. We have a helpline if anybody ever needs our services. JPD also has a Northeast Arkansas human trafficking hotline that you can call. So if you ever, if you suspect anything, if you see something, say something. That's what we always say. You can call that hotline to report it. And then, of course, if you're on social media, please follow us and stay up to date on what we're doing. Do y'all have any questions? Yes, sir.
Bill Burnett. You have to pardon me just for a minute for editorializing. The sex trafficking or trafficking, human trafficking is certainly a real problem that I don't think we think that much about. We think we're not aware of anyone, but I think of two examples immediately here in Arkansas or in Jonesboro that some of you are aware of, and most of you I think probably are. One was the lawyer who brought in the ladies from a Pacific Coast island, brought them in because they're pregnant to have babies, and then they would send them back, and the babies then would be sold out for adoption. And that got quite a bit of publicity in Northwest Arkansas and throughout the state. Then in our own city, we had a restaurant that was involved in human trafficking as far as bringing in people from other places and things of that nature. So it is real. It is under our nose, and we may not be aware of it as much as what we should. My question, after all that editorialization, what legal powers do you have? What investigative powers do you have? What connection do you have with law enforcement pertaining to investigating human trafficking or finding the victims? And then how do you go from there?
Right. Good question. So we don't go in and rescue or recover victims. So we don't want to put ourselves in danger. And we do leave that up to the law enforcement, but we partner with law enforcement in order to be able to provide services for any victims that they recover. And actually, next month, we are partnering with the state police and Arkansas Children's Advocacy Centers to bring in a 2-day training for law enforcement and medical professionals. One day is going to be covering, specific things about, of course, trafficking, how to interview a victim. But the second day is all about operations, how to investigate human trafficking crimes, how to do these operations. And so I fully believe that after we have this type of training for our law enforcement, there's going to be multiple operations that come out of that training, as well as multiple victims recovered. And we get to be a part of those operations. So once a victim is recovered, we're able to, intervene, provide services, see if they need, help, medical care, if they need, to find a safe place to be. So we partner with a lot of law enforcement throughout Northeast Arkansas just to make sure that they know about us, that we're here to help provide those services to victims and provide any type of support for them.
Okay, John Deacon here. I saw on the internet within the last year or two that there's a particular hand signal that a kidnapped person could do to a person as maybe their captor is they're walking through a grocery store, and there's a hand signal they could do that kind of tells them, hey, I'm in trouble.
Correct. So I've seen that on social media a lot too. That doesn't have anything to do with human trafficking. And I'm not sure if it's been like a designated signal from law enforcement. I think it's good to familiarize yourself with that hand signal in case you see anybody do that. But right now, we just see it as a trend that's on TikTok.
Okay. The second thing is I was at the Rotary International Convention 3 or 4 years ago in Atlanta, and Ashton Kutcher spoke on a human trafficking seminar in front of the entire convention, saying he's involved in technology for helping out in the awareness and whatever they're doing technology-wise for human trafficking. So Rotary is all over this, and I just wanted you to know that.
That's awesome. That's great. Yeah, so Ashton Kutcher founded an organization called Thorn, and they have all this technology and equipment that even our local law enforcement, I believe, has used before to help identify traffickers and online sex predators. It's a really neat organization.
Okay, I'm Jill Clogston. You had 32 served in the fiscal year 2021. Those 32 individuals, what area, Northeast Arkansas or how many counties, in general, where were those individuals from?
Some were from Northeast Arkansas and some were from other parts of Arkansas. Let's see. We served one that came from out of state. I'm sure we served a couple that came from like Arizona. Memphis, we've had some people come from Memphis. But it's been Arkansas. Yeah. Not necessarily always pertaining to Northeast Arkansas, but Central or South Arkansas. Any other questions?
Hey, Megan, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good to see you again. So I've had an opportunity to work with Megan a little bit here, running this hotel, on some things that they needed to.
Mhm.
But I just want to tell you a little bit about our industry and so forth, and how we work to try to combat this as much as possible. Probably 15 years ago, our industry associations decided that they needed to really get involved in this. And it's all about education for our staff too. And so little things like, if you have a guest come in that pays cash, for instance,
Mhm.
that's a red flag. We want to catch that kind of thing. We don't allow anybody at this hotel they can pay cash for the room, but they also have to present a credit card for incidental charges. So the credit card becomes the paper trail for things. So we have very, very few cash transactions. So if anybody wants to go rob a hotel, good luck, because there's really no cash here. It's all credit card transactions. But we look for those red flags. And I actually worked at a hotel up in South Dakota with a property up there in Sioux Falls where we actually had somebody check in that was sex trafficking. And we got a tip about that about 2 days after they checked in. Well, the police really couldn't go into the room without a warrant. But being an innkeeper, a hotel manager, I could. And so it was one of those things where I have every right to go in any room anytime I want in this hotel. And so if I have reasons of suspicion, I just have them behind me and just say, hey, I think there's something here you need to take a look at. And after that, the law takes its course and we're good to go. So it's an unfortunate thing that happens, but it happens in a lot of places. We do everything on our part here to try not to make it happen. So
Thank
just
you.
more of a story.
Yes, we've developed some strong partnerships throughout Jonesboro and Northeast Arkansas, and one of them is Craig and here at Embassy Suites. We're so thankful for their help and partnership and helping us make sure we have, a safe place for a client. Any other questions?
I'd like to give you a small token of our appreciation for you being here today. This is a coin. This is Paul Harris, and on the back is a four-way test. And you'll hear us recite that in just a minute. But we would also like to, the Rotary Club of Jonesboro would like to present you with a $1,000 check for the training center training coming up the end of February at Central Baptist. And think you do wonderful work, and we sincerely appreciate all you do.
Thank y'all so much. I really
Thank you.
appreciate it. Thank y'all.
Next meeting, again, is January 25th. Look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.